What happens when the happiest day of your life becomes proof of betrayal? How can a husband stay calm after discovering his best friend's hand, where it never should have been, on the wedding video itself? And how far will a woman go to convince herself it meant nothing, even as her world quietly collapses? I'm Seraphine Lang, but everyone calls me Sarah. I'm 31, newly married, and apparently the villain of my own wedding story. People love to talk about what happened. They call it scandalous, disgusting, unforgivable. But no one ever asks me what it felt like. They just see a few seconds of a video and decide who I am. They don't understand that weddings are chaos, that people drink too much, that sometimes things look worse than they are. I keep saying that, but no one listens. Ethan, my husband, used to be proud of how laid back I was. He liked that I could laugh off awkward moments, that I didn't care what people thought. He said it made me fun. I guess that stopped being a compliment after he saw the footage. I still remember the look on his face when the video froze, Caleb's hand under the table, under my skirt, while I smiled and said something stupid. The room went silent. The videographer tried to skip ahead, but Ethan said to let it play. He watched the whole thing, calm as stone. I swear I didn't even notice it happening that night. It was a joke, a quick touch, nothing serious. Caleb's always been like that, flirty, careless. I laughed because it was easier than making it awkward, but that laugh is what ruined everything. Now Ethan won't look at me the same way. He barely talks. He moved into the guest room 2 weeks after the video came back. Everyone keeps asking if I regret it. I don't know what to say. Regret what? Laughing? Sitting too close? Not catching his hand in time? I tell myself it was just bad timing. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder if Ethan's silence is worse than any shouting could ever be. Before we dive deeper into the story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. It started like any other morning. The smell of coffee drifted through the kitchen while sunlight cut across the counter. Ethan was already dressed for work, reading something on his tablet. He didn't look up when I walked in, just said good morning in that quiet, even tone of his. I hated when he sounded polite. It made him feel like a stranger in my own house. I told him I was meeting the videographer that afternoon to pick up our wedding footage. He said he couldn't come. Too much work. I rolled my eyes and said he'd rather stare at spreadsheets than relive the best day of our lives. He didn't rise to it. He rarely does anymore. When I set his coffee in front of him, I brushed his shoulder on purpose. He didn't even glance up. I said he'd been cold lately, that I wasn't used to this distance. He said he wasn't cold, just tired. Then he asked why Caleb had been messaging me so often after the wedding. I said it was about planning a surprise for him, a lie that came too easily. He nodded but didn't press. That calmness of his always unnerved me. It was like arguing with a locked door. The tension hung between us all morning. When he finally left, I watched from the window as he drove away. My phone buzzed just as his car turned the corner. Caleb, of course. Tell me when you get the video. I want to see how good I looked. I laughed and texted back, you were barely in it, don't get too excited. Still, I liked the attention. Caleb always made me feel interesting, like I could still turn heads even in a wedding dress. Ethan never did that. At noon, I met the videographer, a quiet young guy named Sam. His studio smelled like dust and wires. He said he'd done some color editing and wanted our feedback before finalizing it. I told him Ethan couldn't make it, but that I'd approve everything. He played the video on a big screen. Slow music, vows, dancing, the usual stuff. I smiled seeing everyone so happy, especially Ethan, his hand tight in mine during the ceremony. For a moment, I felt something close to guilt, though I wasn't sure why. Then the reception scene started, everyone laughing, glasses clinking, Caleb seated right beside me, as always. The camera panned over us, catching me leaning close to whisper something to him. I remembered the joke. It was about Ethan's speech being too serious. I had laughed, and Caleb had squeezed my knee under the table. Watching it again, I could almost feel that quick pressure, the warmth of it. Sam fast-forwarded through the speeches, then slowed again during the toasts. That's when it happened. The angle shifted slightly, catching Caleb's arm move under the tablecloth, my hand lifting my glass. I laughed again, not even realizing what was visible. His hand clearly brushed higher, the movement unmistakable. Sam coughed and hit pause. "Sorry," he said awkwardly. I froze. My throat tightened, but I managed to say it was nothing, just an illusion from the camera angle. He nodded too quickly, clearly wanting the moment to end. I told him to skip ahead. My voice didn't sound like mine. When I left the studio, the air outside felt heavier, like I'd stepped into sunlight after too long underground. Caleb called a few minutes later, asking how the video looked. I said fine. He laughed, said, "Even the part under the table." My stomach dropped. I asked what he meant. He said, "Relax, Sarah, you laughed, remember? It was a joke." That night, I told Ethan the video was ready. He said we could watch it together later in the week. I said fine, pretending I wasn't nervous. But I couldn't stop thinking about that clip. The camera flash, Caleb's smirk, my laugh echoing in the background. I tried to tell myself it didn't look that bad, that Ethan wouldn't even notice. When Ethan came home, he looked tired. He took off his tie, sat down, and said he'd seen Caleb that afternoon. My pulse jumped. He said Caleb mentioned I'd picked up the video. I said yes, that it was beautiful. He asked if I wanted to watch it together. I said I'd already checked it for errors. He just nodded. Later that night, I caught him scrolling through our wedding photos on his phone. He wasn't smiling at them. He was studying them like evidence. I asked what he was doing. He said, "Remembering the day before everything changed." I asked what he meant. He said nothing. The next day, I tried to distract myself with work, but by evening, Ethan texted, "Can we watch the video tonight?" I said sure, even though my stomach twisted. I lit candles, poured wine, tried to make it feel romantic again. He sat close, but not touching me. As the footage played, I narrated every scene, pretending to relive the joy. When the clip appeared, the one I'd begged Sam to skip, Ethan's hand stilled on the remote. He didn't pause, just watched. My voice caught, but I forced a laugh. "You can't even see anything," I said lightly. He didn't reply. The scene ended. He kept watching, face calm, eyes unreadable. When the video finished, he turned to me and said, "You didn't even flinch." I said, "Because it was nothing." He said, "Then why did you just stop breathing?" I felt cornered. I told him he was seeing things that weren't there, that Caleb had probably shifted his chair or fixed the tablecloth. He said quietly, "You've practiced that lie before." The word stung more than I expected. I said he was being paranoid, that his jealousy was ruining everything. He didn't argue. He just stood, took the empty wine glass to the sink, rinsed it, and said, "I'll sleep in the guest room tonight." I told him not to be dramatic. He said, "I'm not. I just don't want to hear your voice for a while." Then he walked upstairs, leaving me alone with the flicker of the TV and the paused frame. Caleb's hand frozen mid-motion, my face turned toward him, smiling. The next morning, Ethan was gone before sunrise. The kitchen was spotless, his coffee mug cleaned and put away. On the counter sat a note. "Going into the office early. Don't wait up." I read it twice, unsure if it was anger or resignation behind those words. When I turned on my phone, there was one new message, from Caleb. He saw it, didn't he? I didn't answer. I deleted it and made myself another coffee. But I couldn't shake the image of Ethan's face, still and quiet, watching that screen like he'd already started preparing for something I couldn't name. That afternoon, when I came home, I noticed his laptop open on the dining table. A spreadsheet filled the screen, columns labeled expenses, dates, and documents. Beside it, a small USB drive rested on a folded piece of paper. I didn't touch either. I just stood there, staring, while the sound of the refrigerator hummed in the background. Then his phone buzzed once on the counter. I glanced at the screen before it dimmed again. One message preview read, "Downtown 10:15 confirmed." The house felt colder then, and for the first time, I wondered if maybe I wasn't the one holding control anymore. The next evening, Ethan came home late. I was sitting at the table with takeout boxes spread out, pretending to eat. He walked in quietly, loosened his tie, and set down his keys without saying a word. I asked if he'd had dinner. He said yes. His tone was calm, too calm. That calm scared me more than shouting ever could. I told him I'd spoken to Caleb earlier. He paused mid-step, then asked why. I said I just wanted to clear the air, to make sure there weren't any more misunderstandings. He said, "There weren't any misunderstandings. There was evidence." The word evidence hit harder than I expected. I told him he was exaggerating, that it was a moment taken out of context. He said, "The camera didn't have context either. It only saw what was real." I tried to laugh, told him he was sounding dramatic, like some detective. He didn't respond. Instead, he opened the fridge, poured himself water, and asked if I'd deleted any files. I asked what files he meant. He said, "You know which ones." I said no, that I didn't even have the footage anymore. That was true. I'd deleted my copy that morning. He nodded like he already knew. He said, "Good, I've already saved what matters." Then he walked past me to the guest room. The next morning, he was gone again before sunrise. His notebook sat on the counter, open to a fresh page. There were lists this time, dates, times, names. One line made my chest tighten. "Meet Caleb. Verify timeline." I texted Caleb right away. He said Ethan had stopped by his office the day before, asking about that night. Caleb said he played it cool, told Ethan it was nothing. Then he added, "But your husband doesn't buy it. He's not saying much, but he's digging." I told him Ethan was just overthinking. Caleb said, "Maybe," but he looked calm, like a guy who already knows the ending. That day at work, I couldn't focus. My co-workers were still gushing about the wedding video. Someone said, "You two looked so in love." I smiled tightly, wondering which part they'd watched. When they asked if I'd seen the viral clip making rounds in our local wedding group, the one where something funny happens under the table, my stomach turned. I asked what clip. They laughed, said it was probably just edited gossip, then changed the subject. I spent the rest of the day terrified someone would recognize me. When I checked my phone, there it was. A private message from an unknown account with a link and the caption, "You might want to see this before he does again." The clip was blurry, cropped to a few seconds, but I knew it immediately. The movement under the table, my laugh, Caleb's hand. Someone had uploaded it. My hands shook as I deleted the message and cleared my history, but the panic stayed. That night, Ethan was in the living room when I came home. The lights were dim, the TV on mute. I asked if he'd eaten. He said he wasn't hungry. I tried to make conversation, but he didn't answer. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "Do you remember what you said right after that moment in the video?" I blinked, unsure what he meant. He said, "You told him he was brave for doing it in front of everyone." I froze. I didn't remember saying that, but maybe I had. The video had sound. Maybe the microphone caught it. I said, "You're twisting things again. It was a joke." He said, "You keep saying that word like it makes everything small." I felt heat rise in my face. I told him he was cruel, that he was using this to humiliate me. He said, "No, you did that yourself. I'm just remembering the details." I wanted him to yell, to argue, to show any emotion, but he stayed calm. That calmness made me furious. I said, "You're acting like I cheated on you in front of the world." He said, "Didn't you?" The word stung, but I didn't answer. Instead, I grabbed my purse, said I needed air, and slammed the door behind me. I drove to my mother's house without thinking. She opened the door wearing her robe, startled to see me so late. I told her everything in bits and pieces, how Ethan had seen the video, how he was acting distant, how he was keeping notes like some investigator. She said, "Honey, men take things too seriously. He'll cool down." I said, "I don't think he will." She told me to call Caleb to make sure he wasn't panicking too. So I did. He answered right away, whispering, like he didn't want Tessa to hear. I said Ethan was becoming cold, scary. Caleb said, "Scary how?" I said, like he's planning something. He's too calm. Caleb said, "Then maybe give him something to calm him down. Tell him you're sorry, that it was just me being stupid. I'll back you up." I thanked him, but I couldn't shake the way he said me being stupid. It sounded like guilt. When I got home, Ethan's car was in the driveway, lights off inside. I walked in quietly. The air felt different. He'd cleaned the kitchen, stacked papers neatly on the table. His laptop was closed, but next to it was a small USB drive labeled footage copy. I picked it up, then froze when I heard the stairs creak. He appeared in the hallway, calm as ever. He said, "Looking for something?" I said, "Just cleaning up." He said, "I'd prefer you didn't touch that." I asked what it was. He said, "Proof that I'm not crazy." I tried to laugh, said he was losing it. He said, "Maybe, but this time I'll have everything in order." Then he walked past me, picked up the USB and went upstairs. I stood there, shaking, trying to convince myself he was bluffing. But the way he'd said, "in order," made my stomach twist. The next morning, he was dressed early again, sipping coffee like nothing happened. I asked if we could talk. He said, "After work?" I said, "No, now." He said, "You'll have plenty of time to talk soon." Then he put his cup in the sink, grabbed his briefcase and walked out. The door clicked softly behind him. A minute later, his phone buzzed on the counter. The preview showed a text from an unsaved number, "Documents ready for review." I stared at it for a long time, heart pounding, until the screen went dark. That night, when I went to bed alone again, I couldn't stop thinking about that message. Documents ready for review. What kind of documents? For what? I tried to tell myself it was work. It had to be. But deep down, I knew Ethan wasn't working late anymore. He was building something, and when it was finished, it wouldn't be for both of us. By the weekend, the silence had turned into something sharp. Ethan and I moved around the house like strangers, careful not to brush shoulders, careful not to speak too long. Every word felt like it might set off something we couldn't take back. On Saturday morning, he said he had errands downtown. He didn't ask if I wanted to come. He just grabbed his keys and left. I watched him through the window. That same steady walk, the same blank expression. I used to think his calm was strength. Now it felt like distance I couldn't cross. As soon as he left, I called Caleb. He answered on the second ring, sounding groggy. I told him things were getting worse, that Ethan was acting strange. Caleb said, "He's not strange, he's smart. You think he's just going to yell? He's doing what quiet men do, waiting." I said he didn't have anything to wait for. There was nothing between us. Caleb sighed and said, "You keep saying that like it'll change what's on the tape." The words hit me hard. I told him to stop talking about it. He said, "Fine, but you should know Tessa's been asking questions. She saw the clip online before I took it down." That made my chest tighten. I said, "You took it down?" He said, "Yeah, someone uploaded it again from another account though. It's everywhere now." I hung up. My hands were shaking. I checked my phone, typed my name and the wedding date into the search bar. There it was. Blurred footage, 2 million views, comments piling in. Disgusting. Poor husband. That smile says everything. I deleted the app, but it didn't help. The image burned in my mind, Caleb's hand, my face, Ethan sitting somewhere watching it again. When he came home that afternoon, I was waiting. I asked if he'd seen it. He said, "Yes." Just that. I told him I didn't know how it got out. He said, maybe some things don't want to stay buried. I tried to sound confident. It doesn't prove anything. He said, it proves enough. He went to the kitchen and poured water. I followed him, demanding to know what he planned to do. He said, nothing for now. I already have what I need. I laughed, said he sounded like a lawyer. He didn't smile. You'll understand soon, he said. That night, I lay awake in our bed alone. I heard the faint hum of the printer again from the guest room. I almost went to check, but I couldn't make myself move. Sunday came. My mother invited us to brunch. I didn't want to go, but Ethan said we should. People talk less when you show up, he said. I couldn't tell if it was a threat or advice. At the restaurant, the air was thick with whispers. Marianne smiled too brightly, asked how we were doing. Ethan said, we're fine, and took a sip of coffee. I stared at him, waiting for some crack in his voice, but there wasn't one. Halfway through brunch, Caleb and Tessa arrived. I didn't know they'd been invited. My stomach flipped. Marianne looked thrilled, said how nice it was to have the whole wedding gang together again. Caleb looked pale. Tessa avoided my eyes. Ethan greeted them calmly, shaking Caleb's hand like nothing had happened. That calm terrified me. The conversation was forced at first. Small talk about work, travel, weather. Then Marianne said she'd seen the wedding video on Facebook. My fork froze mid-air. Ethan didn't react. Marianne said, people can be so cruel online. They twist everything. She gave me a pitying look. I nodded, pretending to agree. But then Tessa spoke. They didn't twist it. They just posted what was there. The whole table went silent. Caleb tried to change the subject, but Tessa wasn't done. You humiliated my husband and yours, she said quietly. And you sit here acting like nothing happened. I said she was being unfair, that it wasn't like that. She said, then tell me how it was. Ethan didn't intervene. He just watched, his expression unreadable. Finally he said, let her talk. Tessa stood. No, I've said enough. You two can keep pretending, but I'm done with both of you. She grabbed her purse and left. Caleb followed, his face red with embarrassment. The table stayed quiet. My mother tried to laugh it off, but no one joined her. When the check came, Ethan paid without a word. On the drive home, I said Tessa was overreacting. He said, she's reacting. You might want to try it sometime. I told him I was tired of his riddles. He said, you're tired because you can't keep the lies straight anymore. I snapped then, shouting that I wasn't a liar, that it was one stupid moment taken out of proportion. He said, you're right. It was small, just enough to change everything. He parked the car and got out before I could reply. I stayed there, gripping the steering wheel, shaking with anger and something close to fear. That night, I tried to make peace. I waited until he came to bed, slid close, and said softly, can we start over? He didn't move. I said, please, I made a mistake. Don't throw everything away over 1 second. He turned his head and looked at me for the first time in days. You're right, he said. It only took 1 second. Then he got up, took his pillow, and went back to the guest room. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of drawers opening. He was packing a small bag, neat, organized. I asked where he was going. He said, to make things right. I asked what that meant. He said, you'll see. Before he left, he put his wedding ring on the counter. Don't lose this, he said. It's still part of the story. When the door closed, I stood there staring at that ring, feeling the world tilt just a little. A few hours later, I got a text from my mother. Ethan stopped by, said he's handling things properly. What's happening? My hands went cold. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked to the living room and turned on the TV. The newsfeed still showed that clip, blurry, cruel, unending. The comments were worse now. People had found my name, my face, even our city. Some were defending Ethan, calling him dignified. One comment stood out. If I were him, I'd handle it legally. I stared at those words for a long time, and for the first time since the wedding, I realized Ethan wasn't just angry, he was deliberate. He wasn't shouting because he didn't need to. He was already moving towards something final, and there was nothing left I could say to stop it. By Monday, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Half the messages were from people pretending to care, the other half from those pretending not to judge. My mother wanted me to come stay with her until things cooled down. I told her nothing was cooling down, that Ethan was the one making it worse by acting like the victim. She said, "Sarah, sometimes silence speaks louder than shouting." I hung up. When Ethan got home that evening, he didn't even acknowledge the noise around us, the messages, the gossip, the stares I got when I ran errands. He walked in, put down his briefcase, and asked if I'd paid the electricity bill. That's all. I snapped. I said he was pretending everything was fine while letting me take the blame for something we both could have handled privately. He said, "We did handle it privately. You made it public." I told him I hadn't posted anything. He said, "You didn't have to." You laughed. That cut deep. I said he was being cruel, that he was making me feel like a criminal. He said, "Then stop behaving like one." I slammed a drawer hard enough to make the utensils rattle. Hannah, our niece, was staying with us that week. She walked into the kitchen just then, holding her tablet. She asked why everyone online was saying mean things about Aunt Sarah. My breath caught. I said, "They're just bored people with nothing to do." She frowned and said, "Uncle Ethan said people talk when they see things they don't understand." Then she went back to the living room. Ethan looked at me, calm as ever. I said, "You told her?" He said, "No." She asked. I spent the next hour pacing. Every time I tried to speak, he just listened quietly, which somehow made me angrier. Finally, I said, "If you hate me so much, why don't you just leave?" He said, "Because I'm not done." The words chilled me. I asked what that meant. He said, "It means I'm finishing what you started, but properly." Then he picked up his laptop and went upstairs. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing that word echo, properly, like he had a plan, a script I wasn't part of. Around midnight, I went to the guest room door. The light was on inside, faint under the crack. I heard typing. I was about to knock when his voice stopped me. He was on the phone, speaking softly. I caught only fragments. "Yes, I have all the dates. I'll bring the copies." "No, she doesn't know yet." My chest went cold. I backed away quietly and went to the kitchen. The counters were spotless, his coffee mug clean and placed upside down like always. That calm order was starting to terrify me. The next morning, Olivia, his mother, showed up unannounced. She looked serious, dressed too formally for a casual visit. Ethan wasn't home. She asked if she could sit down. I poured her tea, my hand shaking slightly. She said she'd spoken to Ethan. I asked what about. She said, "About the next steps." I said, "What steps?" She looked at me for a long moment before saying, "You should prepare yourself. He's not angry, Sarah. He's finished." I told her she didn't know what she was talking about, that she was just trying to scare me. She said, "I used to think his silence meant weakness. I was wrong." Before she left, she placed her hand on mine and said, "You'll regret laughing that day more than anything else in your life." Then she walked out. I stood there for a long time after the door closed, staring at the teacup she'd left untouched. When Ethan came home that night, I asked if he'd talked to his mother. He said yes. I asked what she meant about next steps. He said, "You'll know soon enough." I laughed bitterly. "You talk like you're about to put me on trial," I said. He looked at me, steady and expressionless. "I don't have to," he said. "You already did that to yourself." He went upstairs again, leaving me standing in the kitchen with my own reflection staring back from the dark window. A few minutes later, I heard a quiet click, the printer again, steady and methodical. Then, the soft closing of a drawer. The next day, he didn't come home for lunch. Around 2, I got a text from a blocked number. Delivery confirmed. Thank you for your time. I stared at it, my hands trembling. When he returned that evening, he was calm, almost kind. He asked if I'd eaten. I said no. He reheated soup for me, set the bowl on the table and said, "Eat, you'll need your strength." I looked up sharply. For what? He smiled faintly. For when things move forward properly. Then he turned away and went upstairs, leaving me staring at the untouched soup, my stomach twisting. I knew then something was coming, something that would take the control I thought I had and turn it into a lesson I would never forget. For the next few days, Ethan was almost gentle. That scared me more than his distance ever had. He woke early, made coffee for 2, and left 1 mug waiting for me on the counter. He even asked how I'd slept, as if we were polite neighbors instead of a married couple quietly collapsing. His calmness felt rehearsed, like he was preparing for a performance I hadn't been invited to. I tried to match his tone, to act normal. I asked if he wanted to go out that weekend, maybe drive to the coast. He said, I already have plans. When I asked what kind, he said, official ones. The words hung there between us. That night, I heard him in the guest room again. The low hum of the printer, the soft shuffle of papers. I pushed the door open slightly and saw neat stacks of documents, all clipped and labelled. 1 folder sat on the desk marked household. Another said personal statements. I asked what he was doing. He said, sorting what's mine. I laughed, trying to sound light. What's yours is mine, remember? He looked up and said, not anymore. I told him he was overreacting, that we could fix this if he just stopped treating me like an enemy. He said, I'm not treating you like anything. I'm documenting. I stepped closer, trying to touch his shoulder, but he leaned away without a word. I said, you're trying to make me feel guilty. He said, no, I'm making sure guilt has a record. The printer beeped again, another sheet sliding out. My pulse jumped. I wanted to rip it out, tear everything apart, make him stop being so calm. Instead, I whispered, what are you planning, Ethan? He didn't look up. To handle it properly, he said. That word again. Properly. It had become a sentence all on its own, the full stop to everything I said. He left early the next morning, as usual. When I went downstairs, his phone buzzed on the counter. The preview said, downtown meeting confirmed, 10:15. My throat went dry. I sat there staring at the message until it disappeared. By evening, I'd almost convinced myself it was work. But when he came home, there was something final in the way he moved. Measured, careful. He cooked dinner, washed the dishes, and then sat across from me like we were strangers, signing a peace treaty. I asked, are you ever going to tell me what this is about? He said, you already know. You just don't want to admit it. I said, you can't just erase a marriage because of a joke. He said, it wasn't a joke. It was the moment you decided I wasn't enough. I felt my throat close. He stood then, took his mug, and rinsed it. Before walking away, he said, you should rest tonight. Tomorrow, everything begins. I tried to laugh, but no sound came out. He looked back once and said, I'll handle it properly. Then the door to the guest room closed with that quiet, final click. I sat there for a long time, staring at my reflection in the dark window, realizing I was no longer waiting for him to forgive me. I was waiting for whatever punishment his silence had been planning all along. It happened the next morning. The sky was grey, the kind of dull light that makes everything feel colder. Ethan left before sunrise again, like always. I stood at the window, watching his car pull out of the driveway, wondering if this was the last time I'd see him drive away as my husband. I spent the morning pacing, checking my phone every few minutes. There was no message, no call, just silence. By noon, I couldn't take it anymore. I told myself I'd go find him, that we needed to talk face to face, that I could still fix this if I explained it right. I knew he always picked up his niece from school on Fridays, so I drove there, hoping to catch him before he got home. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I kept rehearsing what I'd say, something calm, something that would make him remember who we were before everything fell apart. When I pulled up to the school, parents were gathered near the gate, chatting in low voices. I spotted Ethan easily. He was standing near his car, his hands in his pockets, looking perfectly at peace. That calm expression again, the one I used to admire. I walked up to him quickly, ignoring the stares. "We need to talk," I said, my voice shaking. He looked at me, quiet and unreadable. Then a man in a dark jacket stepped forward, holding a folder. "Mrs. Lang?" he asked. I nodded, confused. He handed me an envelope. I thought it was some mistake until I saw Ethan's name printed neatly at the top corner. My stomach dropped. I tore it open. The first page said petition for dissolution of marriage, temporary custody and financial orders. My vision blurred. "You can't be serious," I whispered. Ethan didn't flinch. He said, "I told you I'd handle it properly." People nearby had started to notice. 2 mothers glanced over, whispering. I could feel their eyes on me, the pity already forming in their expressions. I said, "You're doing this here, in front of everyone." He said, "It started in public, it ends in public." His voice was calm, almost gentle. That made it worse. I tried to argue, to say this wasn't fair, that he was overreacting. My words came out broken. He just nodded slightly, as if everything was already decided. "You taught me what humiliation feels like," he said softly. "Now I'm showing you what accountability looks like." Then he turned away. I called after him, begging, saying we could still talk, that I could explain. He didn't stop. He walked toward the school doors just as Harper came running out, smiling up at him. He took her hand, her little backpack bouncing as they walked. He didn't look back once. The wind caught the papers in my hand, scattering one across the pavement. I bent to grab it, but another mother picked it up first. Our eyes met. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. I clutched the envelope to my chest and backed away toward my car, my legs shaking. The whispers behind me blurred with the sound of traffic. I slid into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and for the first time, I couldn't find any words, not even excuses. Through the windshield, I saw Ethan lift Harper into the car, buckle her in, and drive off. No anger, no satisfaction, just peace. That was when I finally understood. His silence hadn't been a weakness. It had been the sound of a man preparing to end something forever, and doing it perfectly, properly. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.